Hello and welcome to the Final.From podcast. I'm Emmet Kennedy. It is great to have your company again. And my guest on the show today began his racing journey at the age of just 16 when he became a stable lad and an amateur jockey under the legendary trainer Martin Pipe. He transitioned into the world of business hugely successfully, where he joined Betfair, arguably the last great disruptor into the British betting market, where he played a key role in its growth as head of marketing and director of racing. In 2011, he launched, in fact, the hugely successful Rewards for Racing.com, an award-winning members program that promotes racing to over 1 million followers. And he is the very opposite of what Barney Curley would call a takeout merchant, seeing as he sponsors a prominent racing yard and has owned many national hunt racehorses. And in 2019, he turned to the world of broadcasting, where he's now become one of the most recognisable faces on Sky Sports Racing. Josh Apiafi, welcome to the Final.From podcast.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honoured to have done that, and thank you for that amazing rollout. I'm going to, if I ever need a job, unfortunately I'm unemployable, but equally, if I ever need a job, I'm going to employ you definitely as my agent. And I think the final one of owning horses, it means that all profits go back to racing, as said one firm or two firms in horse racing. I think that probably, when it comes to owning racehorses, that's definitely what happens.
For sure. How do you make a small fortune out of racing? Start with the big one, as they say. Before I get your thoughts, though, on the racing industry, where British racing currently is, and more importantly, where it's going, I don't think enough people know your background and how you got into the racing world. We've seen you do analysis on Sky. I really like your dynamic with Alex Hammond. We don't talk enough about the fact that you were a jockey. How did that all come about with Martin Pipe?
Well, when did it all begin? I think my strapline should have been too fat to be a jockey and too short to be a basketball player, and I did both. I think I was the only licensed jockey to play basketball for England. I played only once, under 16s basketball. I was the shortest in the team, and of course then walked exactly the opposite into a weighing room and looked like the BFG. But how did it all happen? I rode horses from the age of 4 when we moved up to, my dad was in the RAF and then went civil and flew airlines out of East Midlands. And just down the road from our little village was a riding school. And to be honest with you, I had no infinite love of horses when I was a kid. It was my, I suppose, adrenaline rush. It was my, I wanted to go as fast as possible over as big of fences as possible on some poor, unsuspecting pony. And it's only in my adult life did I understand horses a heck of a lot more, and the inner workings of a horse. When I say that, I mean their brain. They're most amazing animals when it comes to people with mental health, people with disability in any way, shape or form, let alone the great sport that we work in. But back then, all I wanted to do was go fast. And I think it was my sort of 10th birthday or something like that. My dad was flying one day, and this guy, his co-pilot, gets on the plane. He's got a shining black eye, and Dad sort of goes, "Get in the cockpit before the passengers see you," thinking this guy's been in a fight. Anyway, they take off. They're flying down to Malaga or something like that. And halfway through the flight, he goes, "Okay, how did you get the black eye?" Thinking there was a punch-up. And this guy turned around. He said, "Actually, I got it riding in the Grand National last week." And sort of Dad was quite taken aback. This guy was little, but back then, pilots earned a significant chunk of change compared to the average salary in Britain. He had no kids, which I, one for no, are quite an expensive commodity. And had a lovely wife that was a stewardess. They had enough money, had a few horses, one of which was good enough to run in the Grand National. The guy's name was Al Hamley. And basically, he'd ridden it the previous week, fallen off, got a kick, black eye bum. And my dad turned around and said, "Would you take my son racing?" And he said, "Of course I would." Because apparently, according to my dad, if you're a captain, you have to say yes to everything that the captain says, especially when you're at 40,000 feet and he's in charge of your life. And long story short, I was toodled off. I had my only day off at school, only ever day off that my parents allowed me from school, was that they knew about, was to go to halfway across the country, and I went to Ludlow races. And I walked in, never been racing before in my life, and just went, "That's what I want to do." Now, I was probably about 5'11" at 13 or whatever, or 12 or whatever I was at the time. And but that was it. There was no stopping me, that sort of willingness to go and do something. And I'm a bit like that anyway. That if it's there and there's an opportunity, let's work hard to get there. And yeah, left school a day after my GCSEs and went straight into Martin Pipes. And I suppose Martin had some of the most effect on me in terms of he always challenged everything and asked why. And it's something that I've constantly asked why, or what's next, and look there. And they're disruptive business. If you look at what I've done career-wise, I think it is a disruptive career, for want of a better word. I was called disruptive for a slightly different reason in school. But equally, Martin disrupted it. Betfair, as you mentioned, was the biggest disruptor in the gaming world, full stop, in my opinion.
Yep.
And if I look now at things like rewards racing that we do, and they're new things that are disrupting what's usually been put in place by looking and going, okay, can we do stuff better? Can we go and launch stuff? And all the Racing Media Academy and all that kind of stuff and opportunities that come with it. Really stem all the way back to Martin Pipe saying to me, question everything, understand everything, and then make your own decision.
The career of a jockey is a limited shelf life. You've only got a certain amount of time you can do that job before eventually you have to ask yourself what comes next. But most jockeys transition into the media world, which you got there in the end, but not immediately.
I realised at 6'1", the jockey career was not going to be for very long whilst I was a skinny teenager. And I think the day, I didn't like hospital food, and I spent more time on the floor than I did in the winner's enclosure. And I think the day my mum said I could be an advert for Feed the World, it was a family decision that I should definitely have something to eat at Christmas, and I'm wasting to ride on Boxing Day on some poor unforgetting novice chaser somewhere. And listen, the last winner I rode was for Martin in a hunter chase at Utopster in 1995. I rode over in America for a year, and then came back and again applied for all the other jobs, trying to get out on what I call the other side of racing, so the non-yard based jobs. And the day I couldn't get I didn't get an interview for the clerical assistant at Market Raisin, I went, right, I need to do something myself. And about 6 months later, I launched my first business, which was called Racing Link, that had a unit that went around every racecourse in Britain promoting horses for sale, fixture list of other racecourses, £10 free bet with Ladbrokes, trips to the Arc of Triumph, and all this kind of stuff. And it went from there, and did that run up for 4 years. The last client through the door before the first batch of foot and mouth hit was a little .com startup, and you can guess who it was. And they turned around and said, once I stopped, and said, look, would you consider coming to work for us? Because we've loved working with you. And I think the reason why they love working with you, they walked in, and here's a story that I've never told. They said, I think my deal was about 3,000 quid for 6 months. And that means they go to 2 race meetings a week, promoting, join Betfair and all this kind of stuff. And they rang me up and they said, listen, we've got enough money for a year in the Racing Post, which is already done, bits and bobs elsewhere, and we can do the 6 months with you, again, £3,000. Can we pay you in instalments to help cash flow? This is Betfair. And I said, of course you can. Because Betfair started on an absolute shoestring, because Flutter, which is now weirdly the Flutter Group, was the big one that took all the money and the VC money from the city. That all went into that one. And Betfair, obviously 2 years in, or 18 months in, consumed, they say merged, but consumed Flutter. And fair play. When I first started working with them, there was no money at all. There was only a handful of them in Russell Square. I joined them 6-7 months later. So they're about a year and a half old. And it went from there. But that's because, and it just shows, I could have turned around and gone, no, I want £3,000. But I've always been one, if you can lower barriers, and this is the whole thing that I've been trying to do for the last 5 years, we've got to lower the barriers to entry to our sport, be that as a racing fan, be that as a youngster, be that as in the workforce. We've got to speak in a far better language. We've got to simplify our product, and that's not what's just on the track. We have over 800 different tickets in UK racing. On an aeroplane, You have 4 classes.
Wait. Sorry, I've misheard something there. You just said there are 800 different types of tickets in British racing. That couldn't be right.
Could it not, Emmet? Well, on Grand National Day, there are 27. So I've asked the question, and I've got good friends that run Aintree, and obviously the Jockey Club run Aintree and stuff like that. And I had a runner at Aintree, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, probably a bit longer than that. And we'd run out of our owner's allocation of badges, and a few friends from school said they'd like to come up. And I said, yeah, just come and buy a badge. They're available online. And they came back and they went, which one? I went, Premier, And they went, Josh, there's 27 different options. In fact, there was more back then. And so I asked the question, actually, why there were so many. And that's because there are insurance restrictions around the Lord Daresbury roof can only take 350. And I'm like, that's fine. But surely class them. So the Lord Daresbury roof and 15 others could all be premium. And this one could be business class. This could be economy, and hospitality is first class. At least you know what you're getting. But when I get 2 tickets to Newbury this Saturday and it says the Mill Reef enclosure, anyone outside of horse racing, well, even if you ask my kids who have grown up in Lambourne and know a lot about horse racing, they didn't know who Mill Reef is. So you don't know what you're getting. So how are we going to explain to people, let alone how many furlongs are in a mile and all the other crazy language that we use when a filly becomes a mare, how are we going to explain to them what they're actually purchasing? Because how do you put a price on something you don't know what you're actually getting?
To the best of my knowledge, and I'm willing to be corrected because I'm often wrong, that's what they've done in Ireland. When you're buying tickets for the Leopardstown Dublin Racing Festival, you know exactly, it's a class system, basically. Do you want your Premier ticket? Or do you want your standard ticket? Do you want your flexible weekend ticket? Same for the Punchestown Festival. But now that you mention it, when you're looking at tickets you're looking for Aintree and the classics at the different tracks, it is a multitude of different ones.
You've got club tickets and best mate. You know what you get?
Yes.
Club
yeah,
tickets,
that's
best mate.
fair.
We're
Very
in
fair
hospitality.
Point.
So I absolutely get that. There's 3 classes at Cheltenham. Now there are 100 different hospitality tickets because there's the Chez Roux restaurant or the Premier restaurant, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But there's 3 classes. Do you want hospitality? Do you want to go in best mate? Or do you want to go in club? Boom. I know what I'm getting. Where I can fly any airline in the world now, business class, long haul, you're 99% guaranteed a flat bed. If you didn't, you'd be a bit peed off. Yeah. Because that's what you're buying. Or premium economy, I want that extra, I'm doing this, I want that extra 1.5 inches of legroom that I've just paid £3 extra for. So you know what you're getting. And that's where we have got to become far better at simplifying what our offering is, both explaining what's out there and both the entrance points into our sport. I'll give you another example. I took my dad to the Super Bowl coming up this weekend, of course, and I took him on 9 years ago. I went to Super Bowl 49. It was amazing, but my dad and the friends that I'd taken with me on that day, there was only 2 of us out of the 7 that knew about American football. We've turned up to the most passionate event you've ever seen, even more passionate than the Dublin Racing Festival. And so we turn up, and I said, "Don't worry, guys. I'll get you the radios and the earpieces, and you can hear the commentary, and you'll know what's going on out in front of you." And anyway, we get in there. It's the most. If anyone gets the opportunity, please go. It's massive bucket list stuff. You feel like you're on the hard deck in Top Gun with fire going everywhere and God knows what else. It's proper 80s rock music going on. And Guns N' Roses and all this sort of stuff blaring out. And anyway, we get there and the game starts. And after each play, the commentator comes on and Tom Brady threw it 8 yards to so-and-so receiver. It's now 2nd down and 2, or whatever it worked out to be. You've got the most passionate fans that know every single thing and could see that, but you still explain it. Whereas when you come horse racing, I was asked a question in a forum, and they said, "Josh, how many race meetings have you been to around the world?" I said, "I would say 3,000. I don't know." And they said, "How many times have you been racing when you've been to one of those meetings where someone's come over the tannoy and told you how many furlongs are in a mile?" I said, "Well, not one." And they said, "Well, how are we supposed to know how long the race is going to take?" because we don't know without playing Google, or you were just expecting us to know. And that's the problem. We expect people to know when a filly becomes a mare, what a gelding is. And the answer I generally get back when I pose these questions is, oh, you'll piss the purist off. I'm like, no, you won't, because they won't even tune in to it, as they say. And of course, 7 furlongs a mile are stones and pounds compared to kilos, or whatever it works out to be that they're going to go and explain. They were saying to me, well, we were there for the first time, and we followed these people around, first time that they'd ever been. I'm not going to say which race course it was, but they didn't. They started with their tickets not knowing what they got. And they then overheard the tannoy, and they went, and they're on their way to post. And they went, God, we've missed it. And I went, wait on a minute. I said, they're going to start. She said, no, they've come over the tannoy and gone, they're going to post. Well, that's the winning post, isn't it? Isn't that not the only post there is? And I'm like, no, going to post means going to the start. Oh, she said, right. These are the kind of things that we are just so used to listening to, but until you start doing sort of mystery shopper with other people, with new people coming into the sport, we've got to explain ourselves so much better, and we're not going to piss the purist off at all by explaining things far better than we do.
Yeah, if you're struggling with Gen Z lingo, like no cap, just imagine what a new fan is experiencing, or somebody who's just gone to the races with friends for the first time and is hearing all the lingo that we all know, but it's alien to them. It's a completely different language.
A new sponsor, Emmet, to British horse racing could be Google Translate, and then you can actually understand how we're speaking about.
We can come up with an AI algorithm that can just decipher it all for you straight away. What language would you like to translate to today? French,
exactly.
Spanish? Oh, British racing. No problem. Consider it done. I think it's a great point to make. ITV, I think, handle this very well, because they have to tread a very, very dangerous path in that they have to appeal to us as fans, everybody watching this, and you and me. But they also have to appeal to the audience who are tuning in to see loose women and are mystified that Ed Chamberlain's staring at them and not their favorite group of women who are going to be putting the world to rights. You don't have to do that on Sky, because it's a dedicated fan base that's tuning in. The people who are watching Sky Sports Racing are tuning in to watch a race and already know what's going on. The purists would be frustrated by it. I think you are right, though. I'm sure there would be some. There would definitely be some who would complain about it.
On course.
Yes.
Not in terms of the TV.
Oh, no. We're very much... Yeah, I didn't clarify that properly. We were very much talking about on course. But it wouldn't be that expensive to have a team of people on course. And think of the opportunity this would give jockeys who have just retired from the sport and are trying to figure out what the next step is and are trying to get into the world of media, but are finding that quite a difficult step to do. Well, if you're able to be at a racecourse, and that racecourse is going to pay you and a presenter to be the on-course team just for the racecourse, and it's for the dedicated television coverage and the tannoy service there, and they will explain things, hopefully not too patronizing and condescendingly, just giving everybody an explanation of what's going on. Surely that can only be a good thing.
It is. There's another way of looking at it, which is what we piloted as part of the racing pathway strategy. So looking at different channels into the sport. And we realized there are some fantastic acquisition tools into our sport, like National Racehorse Week. I think it's brilliant. And we hear numbers like, 3,000 people that have never experienced horses or horse racing came to National Racehorse Week. And this is the Josh questioning that stems all the way back from Mr. Pipe. And I go, okay, so what happens next? No, what? What happens next? And we devised Discover Racing. What is Discover Racing? Discover Racing was a pilot with 7 race meetings around the country, including all the groups. My wife, Abby, was the lead on this, organised all of those. 700 families came, and what was a Discover Race meeting? It's like a taster day or a showcase day. So we had people like the racing colleges there. We had careers in racing there. We had every 20 people got a tour guide, ex-jockeys, assistant trainers, different people from the industry, and they would follow the horse from it getting microchipped and it got into the stables to see it getting tacked up, speaking to a trainer, speaking to a jockey beforehand, speaking to a jockey afterwards, going around the paddock explaining why jockey saddles are this big, or if it was Josh Apiafi about this big, and understanding what colours are, when a filly becomes a mare, that I keep going on about, all these different things and the different language you do. So you're upping their knowledge base of what they do. And this is the whole thing with the racing pathway, this strategy. And if you want to find out any more about that, head to racingpathway.com, which is non-commercial, not for profit. It was a strategy that we launched over a 5-year period for the sport. We're now in year 4, and that's to look at there's a one slide on there on that homepage that depicts where our acquisition routes are. What do we do with our fan base and workforce as they come in? And these taster days, there is currently a proposition to the. We got Godolphin to sponsor ours, which they were fantastic supporters, and we put it to the RCA that every racecourse, as part of their commitment about growing the sport and a new customer base and for the future, should host a taster day where we showcase how brilliant our sport is, but equally for new people. So if you've got all these racecourse members, if you're the racecourse member, probably in your peer group, or even at school, you're probably seen as a bit of the geek that quite likes horse racing. You're a bit unnormal, but equally, and you probably still are now. But how about when you say to your friends, "I'll tell you, why don't you come and see my sport at its best?" And that's not taking them to Cheltenham Festival or Royal Ascot or wherever it is. It's actually come and showcase the sport at its best. Take them there, get them so they get to meet jockeys. They get up close and personal with an ex-racehorse. They start to understand the language that you've been speaking about for years and years and years, that they've tuned out to. And they then start to fall in love with it. So that was the sort of second stage of these taster days. Like I say, there's a proposal with the Racecourse Association that every racecourse should do it. Some of them have said, brilliant, fantastic. No one said no, but it needs to be centrally run. And that is a big problem of our sport. It's so fragmented. To try and get them all to agree, I tend to go to the associations. So be it on the RCA as to whether they decide to go ahead or not. I've heard positive comments back, but I'm yet to see it. And it costs about £5,000 to put one of those days on. That's paying all the hosts and the ex-jockeys and some with broadcasters and all that kind of stuff that come and give them the tour around. The next stage of that pathway goes, okay, how do we make, this is a big question and a good discussion to have, digital fans of our sport? Everything in this world is digital first. Horse racing is physical first. It wants you to come. It wants you to buy a ticket, and it wants you to come horse racing. Whereas if I turn around to you and said, I went to a fantastic restaurant in London last week, it's called blah, 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 blah. The first thing you do, pick up this, you Google that restaurant, digital first. You'll then read 2 or 3 reports on TripAdvisor from people you've never even met before or never will, and you believe them about what that restaurant is like, and then you physically go to a restaurant. Another example, I've been happily married for 20 years, but apparently you no longer go to the pub to meet someone from a potential partner. You go on here and you stalk them on Instagram and Facebook, and then perhaps then a few months later you then go out on a date and do physical first. So it's always, so we've got to start. Emmet, I'm slightly worried.
I was convinced you were about to say you go on Bumble, you go on Tinder. No, you're like, you go on Facebook and Instagram and you stalk them.
You're already speaking in a foreign language. I'm going back on Google Translate to find out what Bumble is, or Rumble, or whatever you call it. Anyway, how do we become digital fans? How do I make a 15-year-old care about what's happening on Saturday afternoon at Newbury in the Betfair hurdle? Because currently, there is no reason for my 15-year-old daughter upstairs to care about what's happening at Newbury. And I need to make you care. So having a fan platform, whatever that looks like, it could be linked far more to social media. It could have centralized ticketing in it. We've got things like Rewards for Racing, which I'm sure we'll come on to, that you can plug into. It's already got over 1 million members on it. Those are the things you can plug into it. And now I can start making you care. I can tell you why Tom needs to beat Holly in this race, because they're pretty close in the title. I can tell you about this. I can give you the people stories that you will understand, or the horse stories that you will understand. All the websites and platforms that we've got are bookmaking generated. So sportinglife.com, racingpost.com, all do fantastic, skysportsracing.com, all do fantastic jobs, but over 18s. Fandom is finished by 15. If you have not got someone captured by 15, you've got no chance. We wait till they're 18, so you're 3 years late, And then you might well become a once a year, go to a big event, away you go. It's a tiny percentage of people that find it in its later life. As I spoke to you, and we've lost generations. When we first originally started talking, and I managed to make you laugh yet again, was when I said racing is like Radio 4, because our customer base is all of mid-50s, 60s and beyond. That's not just about owning racehorses. You only have to go to a normal meeting, and that's what it is. And I want to see people along the way through it. Doesn't mean they have to be at the race meeting. They can still be fans. Someone was talking to me about Manchester United. The overwhelming amount of people that are fans of Manchester United have never been to Old Trafford. They're digital fans.
Yeah.
They still can earn them a lot of money when it gets into NFTs, merchandise, whatever it works out to be. There are ways and means of monetizing it. But we've got to start going, you can have predictor competitions to win an iPhone. So you'll have teenagers coming in and entering these kind of competitions like fantasy football. So if you look at fantasy football, if it's free to play with a spot prize, it's 13 and above. Sadly, the two fantasy options that we've got in our sport are the Token Run one, Godolphin Run one, and they're over 18. You make that under 13 and across the sport, you will get teenagers. If you tell them there's an iPhone at stake, they'll be looking at the form of every single website that's out there to try and predict who they're going to put in their fantasy team for, let's say, that Saturday or for the season. So there are ways and means. We've got to start earlier, but the problem we've got is the sports or the commercial people in our sport are all geared towards 12 months P&L of the organisation they work for. And if I'm successful in gaining lots of people from their early teenage years all the way through, those people aren't going to be in their jobs by the time they get to 18 and start earning with the sport. It's about investing in the future. And because there's no share price of British horse racing, they look at the P&L. Is what Josh is putting forward going to help the P&L this year, which, and this is not a bad thing, hits their bonus? And the answer is no. I'm talking about the P&L in 10 years' time, because that's what I care about. And so I've got to go, okay, how can we start addressing this and moving the sport to a place where it is looking a lot more forward? And even the chair of the BHA put it in the Racing Post at New Year with his wishes for people to start looking forward past that 12 months P&L. So that's what this fan platform hopefully will be. And then the clever part starts with the profiling. And you can then start putting some pathways in place how you can maximise them. So Emmet goes to National Racehorse Week. He quite likes it. He gets given the opportunity to go to a Discover Racing Taster Day, finds out a bit more, meets a jockey, Instagrams it. This is brilliant. Understands more, starts going racing, joins. It's not racing.com because that's what the Australian one's called, but I'm going to call it racing.com for now. Joins racing.com, non-betting focused fan site with lots of great stories about why they are fans of horses, of the sport. Full stop. It's got fashion elements in here. That's what we've provided. So it's all part of the sport. And within there's rewards and loyalty, there's fantasy, and then we start profiling that goes, actually, Emmet, you've bought, and there's ticketing on there, you've bought 3 tickets to the panoramic restaurant at Cheltenham, which cost £800 a seat, which means you're spending significant funds, which is what it is, you're spending significant funds on our sport. Profile-wise, have you ever thought about having a share in a horse? Because people who also spend £800, like you see on Amazon, people who read this book, people who also spend £800 a seat watching a sport that they obviously like, have an interest in owning a horse. And that's how we then start maximising our customer base for our sport. We've got lots of people that come horse racing, but they just come for that one quick P&L win. And how do we market to them again? Well, let's hope they come next year. No. There's so much more that we can do along the way.
But everything you've just said makes perfect sense. There's great logic behind it. There's a vision behind that idea. So why is something like this not being implemented?
COVID didn't help because that hit people's funds. But because there is no share price, and a share price puts in various different algorithms to it. And when I say about that, it's going to look at your growth trajectory. How many new customers have you got in over the last 3 years? even if they're not going to pay you or you're not going to see a return on them for the next 5, if you're tipping enough people in or you're getting enough business here, that's what depicts a lot of share prices. Now, we haven't got a share price. If we did, it would be significantly going this way and down because our audiences are going down. And it's not just us. We have organisations like Flutter that they went around with a presentation to stakeholders within the sport that turned around and said, your customer base is 20 years older than our average customer and they're churning and dying. Now, the bookmaking industry put over £300 million, whatever the number is reputed, I think it's about 310 they eventually agreed on, back into the sport through purchasing of media rights, through levy, and through sponsorship. Now, the reason why they do that, we are the most expensive sport in the world as a product for a bookmaker. Now, the reason why they still do it, you go, well, why do they do it? Because we've been historically a very good acquisition tool for them to get new customers from. Now, the only reason we can stay like that is if we keep tipping people in the pot for them to go and get, because our numbers with the bookmakers are going down. We keep regularly hearing from senior stakeholders in the sport that horse racing is 20% down on turnover as we've now flipped to a turnover deal. So we've got to start tipping in new people into our sport. So I looked at how we got them when we were young, when we were growing up, in the UK anyway. There was 3/4. I remember Channel 4 launching, and there were 4 channels. There are currently 57 different sport channels on the Sky platform. You only have to go onto any bookmaker's website and look at the homepage. Hundreds of different options in terms of how betting has diversified rather than just football and horse racing, which is one of our cherished sports that was on the telly when we grew up. There's so much choice out there, but we've got to become an option. So if we're not an option and we're not bringing new generations on, if I was the boss of one of the bookmaking giants and I had no interest and hadn't done anything in horse racing before, I've come from running British Airways, and I come in and I go, right, and I bring in the various different heads of department and I go, okay, horse racing, how much is betting spending over there? Well, we're spending 300 million, sir, over here. Okay, is it a growth sport? No, sir. Is the next generation of our customers coming through, do they bet on it? No, sir. Okay, so it must be quite cheap then. No, sir, it's the most expensive sport we've got. Okay, if I was the boss, I'd go, right, forget horse racing. Mr. Esport, tell me about esport. What's that? Isn't that where all the youngsters are? Yes, and our next generation of customers coming through? Yes, sir. How much does it cost for us to bet on it? Nothing, sir.
Well, it doesn't cost the bookmaker really anything to bet on any other sport except for horse racing. There would be some mitigating circumstances. And Flutter were kind of sending out a warning because, for those who don't know, they own Paddy Power, Betfair and Sky Bet, but they're about to launch a 4th betting company that will not have horse racing as a product. So that's a signal of intent, and you've laid that out perfectly well. You want to think that this is going to last forever, but you can't assume that it will. And in terms of attracting new fans, like broadcasting is obviously a major part of this, and we're very lucky in racing that we've got ITV, Sky, Racing TV, which really came from nowhere if you think about it. When the collapse of the old At the Races went through, a bunch of racecourses got together and said, look, we'll do this ourselves. And they've made that very successful. TalkSport are heavily involved in racing now, and obviously the BBC in radio sides of things are, but the BBC are not necessarily racing's friend anymore with the editorial content that they've done. But if there is a sense in British racing that, look, if ITV for some reason lose interest, don't worry, we've got an old friend in Channel 4 and we can go back there. Well, the news that came out of Channel 4 last week would be deeply concerning. They're going to lay off 15% of their workforce. They're getting rid of their HQ in London. But more worryingly, by 2030, they will no longer be a terrestrial broadcaster. They will be a digital streaming platform only, and that's in less than 6 years. So the terrestrial broadcast makeup in Britain now will be completely different. It already is. Linear television is over. Nobody is watching the new series of Line of Duty whenever it comes out at 9 p.m. on Sunday. They might, but they're more likely to watch it on the iPlayer or watch it through Sky Q. Same for House of the Dragon when that comes out in the summer. You're not watching that on Monday night at 9 p.m. on Sky Atlantic. You're watching it on Sky Go or you've recorded it the night before on Sky Q and you'll watch it whenever you choose to. You tell your television what you want to watch when you want to watch it. If this is the world that we're now in, and it's clearly digital, then I would look at YouTube and say this is a major gift that we can take advantage of. But do you get the sense that, I know Sky very much embraced this, because all you have to do is look at the Sky platform. They've done deals with Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, Amazon Prime. They will give you Paramount Plus for free if you're a Sky Cinema subscriber, and you get Netflix for free as part of your subscription as well. So they're embracing the digital age. Sky Glass is all about streaming. Do British racing understand this? Do the people in British racing understand that the analog era is over, linear television is over, you have to embrace digital? And are they fully aware of what needs to happen next?
Part of the, I'm going to call it the non-industry strategy, because I don't believe there is an industry strategy, but part of one of the work stream groups was a broadcast innovation. We're yet to see that. I hear that some of it is do the basics better, which we should be doing anyway. Horses walking around in number order, races jumping off on time, that kind of stuff. But I was in the first meeting because I was put forward to run the fan engagement. This was over a year ago now, and finished in April last year, and still we haven't seen a lot. And in answer to your question, I sincerely worry about our digital plans, our broadcast innovation, our jockey cam is used in 370 meetings in America every year. It's used on about 5. And that's probably the one thing that we have gone and done, which is brilliant in terms of bringing the fan closer to what it's like to ride a horse. In terms of platforms, it is an interesting one. My kids don't watch terrestrial television unless Ant and Dec at Christmas, maybe. And that is the same across the board. So I think ITV do an amazing job on horse racing, and the numbers that watch it, the demographic profile, you only have to look at the adverts to work out what the demographic profile of the viewer is. It's an older demographic. So when we look at YouTube, which I think is fundamentally the number one biggest opportunity in getting our sport out to a bigger fan base, and having young presenters, people that look like of our potential viewers, that's what we need to get out there. Because you need, as a potential consumer of anything, you need to recognize yourself. It needs to be attractive. You need to recognize yourself being a consumer of whatever it is. You need to see the teenage program. You need to see the under 20s. You might see the lads program. You might want to see that was something that's far more feminine focused, all around the same product. You only have to look at football for Match of the Day, Soccer Saturday, Monday Night Football. I'm not a soccer fan, but I've obviously seen these programs. All very different brands around and productions around the same sport that's taking place. Racing is very samey. We are ITV, I get, but my next future fans aren't watching that in terms of youngsters, enough of them. So when it comes to what we're doing out on the pitch, I get how Racing TV produced theirs, and I massively get, obviously, working there, how Sky produced theirs. Neither of which, especially when one's behind a £25 a month paywall, how are we going to get the consumers of tomorrow into our sport? YouTube is singularly the biggest answer. And no, in answer to your question, and along with answer to your question, British racing does not have a strategy for YouTube.
Well,
and now you're going to say, why?
Well, that's the obvious question is why. I mean,
well, the reason why is because people are so focused on the next, basically the length of the ITV contract and how important that is. And it is massively important, but it's no one's job. There you go. There's the number one thing. It is no one's job. It's no one's job to engage the future customer base of our sport. It's about Great British Racing do a fantastic job in terms of promoting our sport, but there's marketing and commercial and innovation that just doesn't happen in our sport. There is no innovation group in our sport. It's the number one thing there needs to be. What's going to happen in 5 to 10 years' time? What are other sports doing? What are other leisure industries doing? We don't have to come up with it ourselves. We can just go and copy it from next door. What are cricket doing? What are rugby doing? We can grab different stuff. And to be honest with you, they're quite free to share it because they can look at us and we've got some really good stuff that's forward-thinking and leading. They've got far more. Well, let's do a share and care.
You said earlier that you don't think British racing has a strategy, or at least a joined-up strategy. Do you genuinely believe that?
I genuinely know that. And this is it will pee people off with me saying it, of people who have been behind it. And I've been within those rooms, or the corridors of power, not working for them. I was doing it for free. Which again, you're like, why would you do that? Which a lot of people ask me. And I say, because I care about what this sport's going to look like. You've got to leave your hut far better than you found it. And I found racing's hut was a lot better as I currently sit here today. It's one of the things that I read from reading the All Blacks book. If anyone's not read it, it's a very good book, and it's depicted to business. But equally, the All Blacks leave their changing room tidier than when they found it. Only players. No one else cleans it up. They clean it spick and span before they leave it. And I've sort of gone with that. It's called legacy, and I've gone with that legacy that we need to do a lot more to protect and future-proof our sport moving forward. In terms of the strategy, there's some great work streams and initiatives that are out there, but we need to make more of our participants, the jockeys. We need to do far more on a welfare front. We need to, but what we need to do along with it is it needs to be joined up. Why do we need to make more of our jockeys? Well, it'll engage more, as I talked about earlier on. It will give a person a reason to care. Okay, but where's that person come from? And that's what I see as a whole strategy, and how I've been brought up in my commercial world, and not unsuccessful commercial world, without blowing my own trumpet, of where do we acquire our customers? What do we do to engage them further once we've acquired them? We do it in the bet bookmaking world. Of course you do. It's very easy. But in horse racing, it's different. And it's a long play. And I think the problem we've got with British horse racing, and I will continue to bang this drum, we've got to look further than 12 months being out. So what do we do with them along the way? And then a part of this future fan engagement is you plug in, make more of our sports stars, more of our horses in terms of great welfare stories and retired racehorses and the great stories that we've got behind them. That makes them love it. That's not a strategy, though. The strategy is, how do we get them? How do we keep them and engage them? And then how do we maximize their exposure within our sport? That's a strategy. What we've got, and I'm going to use the dreaded word to you, premierisation, which you're going to go, oh, I can see you sort of freezing already. Actually, I think my screen's, oh no, you've moved, so you are still moving. That's good. The industry strategy was announced in September 2022 by Julie Harrington, the chief exec and still chief exec of the British Horse Racing Authority, saying there would be an industry strategy that would then look at premierising our fixture list. That, I have to say, was smoke and mirrors for premierisation, and which I would call an elevated fixture list to happen. Now, I don't mind people wanting to better our sport at all. That's what I'm here for. Whether they're right or wrong is another thing. But equally, don't pretend there's a strategy as we sit here in 2024 around premierisation. That was all they wanted to get through, was to elevate this fixture list. After a lot of pressure from Peter Saville and people like that, then they're only now looking at what do we do as a strategy behind it. And there are some good people working on some good work streams, but for me, there is no business plan. Where is the target? Do we want to get to 5 million? Go back to 5 million customers? Do you want to go back to 6 or 7? What is the strategy? Okay, and if the answer is yes, we want by 2030, so a 6-year strategy to get to 8 million people coming horse racing. Or is it we have to work very hard to stay where we are? That might be the thing. Through doing research, you might go, you are a sport that if you work really hard, you will stay at 5 million. But you've got to work so hard at it because you're going down at a steep curve at the moment. Okay, that's the aim. Boom. How are we going to do that? And you build a strategy that digitally tracks people along the way so we know when they churn, how difficult it is, cost per acquisition, all these basic things that business people around the world all look at. Racing doesn't. Racing doesn't know what its cost per acquisition is. It doesn't know what its lifetime value of a customer is because everyone's all fragmented. What I'm hoping for is that eventually, they're starting to on various different initiatives like National Racehorse Week or the Racing Media Academy, they start coming together and working together. And that's only going to happen when people aren't getting their bonuses the next 12, on a 12-month P&L because it's hurting too much because they're going down. They're going, we need to change. We need to come together. And should there be, in the environment we've got, can racing afford to have 60 race courses? No one's asking the question. And people will probably go, flipping out, Josh, what are you asking? Why are you posing that? Because we've got to be fit for purpose. It is not the people with the biggest balance sheet businesses that survive. It's the ones that are most agile. We have stopped being agile a long, long time ago. And that's why we're easy pickings for other sport and leisure pursuits because we've not got into the digital era as well as we should have done. Our broadcast is one-dimensional. And we need to start looking at how we become far more agile than we are. Small could be beautiful. Small, hard, we know what we're selling. It's easy for people to understand. Away we go. It's a great product. At the moment, with this big, wieldy Titanic, without anyone steering the ship, and I seriously believe there is no one steering the ship.
Well, that's depressing. You talked about the racing pathway strategy earlier on. It seems very clear, having spoken to you multiple times about this, that you are incredibly frustrated with the lack of actual effort to implement anything that has been suggested from that. And you're talking about Premier Racing. Well, if you've got racecourse executives appearing on the Nick Look Daily saying we are 2 weeks away from Premier Racing beginning and we don't know how we're going to fund this, then people start to begin to panic. They start to wonder who is steering the ship, if the ship is even being steered in the right direction.
Too many people spend their lives being custodians of the past rather than stewards of the future. And that's what we need to start to become, stewards of the future. Because racing isn't being a custodian of the past and the history and whatever it is about the sport of kings, that is no longer true. We need to start caring about how we're fit for purpose moving forward. I respect history, but you can't lean on history. You need to go, okay, hopefully it's given you a base. You need to bounce and modernize and adapt. And that's my biggest problem. I completely agree. Why do I come up with various different barriers to progress? Again, because it's no one's job. We need to restructure our sport that it is someone's job. It shouldn't be my job. I'm calling it out, and then I go and do and launch various initiatives, like the Racing Business Apprenticeship, because we had a low level of entry-level jobs into our sport, which is why we're very one-dimensional and predominantly white within our workforce, because there aren't entry-level jobs to go outside of the stable yard. We need to broaden that net. 1 million teenagers growing up, unless you ride a horse, none of them say, I want to work. I'd love, one day, my dream would be to run Cheltenham or Ascot or Leopardstown. But some of them will say, actually, I'd be really keen to get into leisure and run Wembley or Old Trafford or Goodison Park or wherever it is, and getting into that way. We need to become that option. And currently, I don't think we are. So how do we become that option? So let's go and ask the difficult questions. How do we become an option for brilliant people of the future to come to our sport, be it as a fan base or be it as a workforce? And also, how do we get into those communities, which is where the whole diversity and inclusion side comes into it, and actually go, okay, here is the option, and here is the pathway to come through. You rarely get to see someone who is working, who is doing GCSEs, A-levels, or university saying, I want to go and work in horse racing. They when you do meet them on the non-riding side of the sport, they're in their second or third jobs, and they've sort of found horse racing, and they sort of parachute in there, but they rarely come through. In the UK, I don't know enough about Ireland, But that's what generally happens in the UK. And I want people to go, I can't wait to be part of this sport, and off you go. I have a son who's 6'5". He was like his dad, probably shouldn't have been a jockey. He was never going to be a jockey. So, but racing has never reached out to him as a career opportunity. And there are so many brilliant jobs that we've got in our sport. Yes, the Racing Media Academy. Why did I launch that? Because I wanted to see a far more future diversity both in front and behind the camera, because the faces of our sport, which unfortunately some of us are within the media, we've got to reflect society far better than we currently do, especially background diversity. Where do you come from? Rather than a horsey pony club background, where do you come from? I'm not saying everybody is, but we need to be far more, because we need to put those people, those pin-ups, and I don't mean just sticking people up on the wall, but let's take Brian Finch, for example. First non-white chairman of Epsom, of any racecourse in 300 years of British horse racing. First one. So for 300 years, no one's ever been good enough. Doubtful, isn't it, really? But equally, no one's seen it as an option. So Brian, he loves this, at 60 is my latest pin-up. He never thought he would be a pin-up, but because people might go, oh, that's now an option for me. Or, I didn't realise you could do that in the sport. And the whole new different sets of communities can now start to see that. And it's not just on an ethnicity side. So driving that, which is why I was so frustrated with the Diversity in Racing Steering Group that the sport launched 7 years ago. After 7 years, there is no strategy to improve diversity in the sport. 7 years of committee meetings. I left after 2 out of pure frustration and went and did the likes of the Racing Pathway to try and actually go and stop talking and let's start doing. And I think that's another big thing within British horse racing. I am infused. They've got a new head in there called Lyndon Roberts, who's come from outside our sport, and he's piled in some energy. He started doing surveys, including within his own organisation, the BHA, that massively need to step up to the mark when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And at the moment, just see, it's dropped off board agendas. You can go online to the British Horse Racing Authority site, and you can see the board minutes of their every meeting they've got. Diversity and inclusion has gone.
You would like to think that in 2024, the British racing has embraced being a modern sport and embracing into the digital era, particularly when you're able to look at the success of Rachel Blackmore, Holly Doyle, Bryony Frost. Yeah. I'll come back to that in a second. Some of the best jockeys are females. I've been doing this show long enough that wasn't the case. Nina Carberry and Katie Walsh were phenomenal talents, but they were amateur riders. They were having Cheltenham Festival success, in Katie's case, in open company, but they were still amateur jockeys. It took Lizzie Kelly to be the first female jockey to win a Grade 1 over fences in the Cotto Star Novice Chase. It took Bryony Frost to win a Grade 1 at Cheltenham. Rachel Blackmore, Cheltenham Festival success, Grand National success, obviously. Holly Doyle is a top 5 jockey in the British Jockeys Championship. Don't take my word for it. Look at the results of the British Jockeys Championship over the last few years. She's being asked to go ride in Japan. She was being booked for the Breeders' Cup until the ban kicked in. These are people who are thriving in this sport, and that's fantastic to see. Where's the other sports that are able to say that? Yeah. Men versus women in racing has been a thing for years. It used to be female trainers beating male trainers. Now it's female jockeys beating male jockeys. And yet, is it a fear of progress? Is it a fear of opening the sport up? Is it a fear of moving forward?
And I tell you what the fear is, and we're responsible. There you go. There's a spectacular comment. I think racing media is responsible. It is fear. It's utter fear by the likes of the BHA, the RCA, Great British Racing, any of them, to launch some and shout about something new. Premierisation, case in point, all right? At least they are trying to better our sport. So they open the door. An underconfident organisation like the BHA opens the door with premierisation, and as soon as the door opens, this torrent of abuse of why it's so shit comes from British horse racing's media. And they shut the door. or they try and protect why it's so good and why we should be doing it, even though, my opinion is it needs tweaking, but at least they've started. I sent a notes to the chair and chief exec saying we need to start improving, and here are my thoughts. Not this is rubbish, this is rubbish, this is rubbish. You're not even fit for purpose. Blah 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 blah. What do you think will happen to an underconfident person that opens the door and gets barrages of abuse every time they launch something new? The door shuts and it'll never open again for fear of that. We've got to give people confidence, but we need to give constructive feedback in the right format as well, in terms of where, how broader spread of focus groups X, Y, and Z were there on, not even were there on it, moving forward. How do we tweak it? How's it funded? Everything that we've got needs to far more detail and professionally run and be owned by someone. It's currently not owned by anyone. You don't have to go racing to be a fan. Everything my kids do, and everything pretty much everyone does, is on here, and especially teenagers. You can still be a fan of racing without going racing. But those that run racing think it's all about spending money at the races by buying a ticket or coming there. That's how racing is run. You can still be a fan. But I would get the digital fan, and that's what it's investing in the future, because the future is digital and we're analog.
Yeah, and I would argue that's very much a case in Ireland as well. I mean, I don't know the full ins and outs of it, but perhaps the reason the racing TV deal went through is because it's going to encourage more people to go racing, because racing TV is behind a paywall. Like, there was a real resistance to Irish racing ever being on the original At the Races, and it didn't really want to go to racing TV in the first place. It was the whole long-winded Sky and SIS were breaking up, and obviously they paid an awful lot of money.
They're back together again, because there's Great British Racing International, and both sides are working together to sell, finally, our product internationally. So it's starting, and this is where I think it's, what does the future look like over the next 2 years in terms of structure of the sport? Collaboration is the way forward. And by showing small parts of where collaboration massively works. National Racehorse Week, fantastic initiative, thought of by Richard Phillips, trainer, maximised by Great British Racing. In a tiny element in my world, the racing media, it's not my world, lots of people's world, the Racing Media Academy. It's got 13 different media partners, which could be seen as warring fractions, and at times definitely are, coming together for the greater good of the sport. These are just small examples. We've got to do so much more. We've got to improve at improving. And this is and you need people like me and you. We are the conscience of the sport to make sure we are improving and not just focused on that 12 months. But equally, there are ways and means of moving a sport and an industry. And it's not dissimilar to the ways and means of moving our beautiful four-legged friends. Some need a kick and a pat, a kick or a pat. Some need a bit of a squeeze. Some need reminding this is what we're meant to be doing. And the sport is exactly the same. Otherwise, it can just stay, like you say, if everyone in the room looks the same and sounds the same, oh, what a comfortable little place, while Rome is burning around them.
Yeah.
And Rome is burning around us. We've got every KPI telling us Rome is burning. We have got to come out with a proper strategy about how we improve. Here's a classic one. There's not one person that works in British horse racing that is in charge of increasing racing's betting turnover. How do they work with the betting industry to increase our turnover? What does it look like? That's what we've got to start doing. Not going, let's just put it on a Sunday night because there's nothing else going on. So we're just basically put greyhounds on a Sunday night. Great. You can still, it's just a product. That's just a quick fix of earning some cash. What are we strategically doing? What have we researched? Not spent 3 years researching it, but what have we researched? What does the data tell us about how we become fit for purpose for the next 5 years? Give them the vision and then work back from the vision. A lot of the things that we've got, people are like, what's happening today? The BHA would admit they're a reactive organisation. It's like, what is today's problem? And we will work on it. It's not what the problems that we're facing over a 5-year period. It's today's problem. And again, a lot of the other organisations, how do we sell the ticket today? Because we've got to hit that P&L. We've got to look at what does 5 years look like? What does racing look like in 5 years? Put it up there on screen. Work it out through data. It's going to tell you if we continue going down by 20% a year on betting turnover, the money's going to significantly drop. We can't run 60 race courses. It still costs 24 grand a year minimum to have a horse in training. The numbers don't add up. Now, yes, you can pick out individual elements where money is being made. The prices of the horses that went at Ferry House on Monday, for example. But they're just little things. And I think they're the outliers that people still go, they'll still spend money on horse racing. But who's going to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds the majority of the time, and you end up running around for less than 5 grand, in a bumper, and you've spent 6 figures plus getting a bumper horse, and that's probably the average. We've got to start looking at this. Where do our owners come from? It's not one person's job in British horse racing. Here you go. That is in charge of finding the next Sheikh Al Thani or international investment to come in and to go, okay, where's our big, that we've lost some huge owners over the last 3 or 4 years, sadly. They've, no one's been filling the bucket up behind them because it's no one's job. Whose job is it to bring owners into the sport? It's trainers at the moment. There's no one out there looking whose job it is, and they should be incentivized. I would love to pay that person millions of pounds in commission if they bring in substantial millions into the sport. Kipco, who are probably the last big backers to come into our sport, spending upwards, I wouldn't know what they've spent, but millions and millions and millions. The person who brings them into that sport, if it's commercial, they should be paid. And if we then start to understand, and we currently don't understand, what our margin levels are in our sport. As a bookie knows what margin levels are. We all talk about the over-round of a race. You know how much a bookie is making from that race. If I went to a trainer and said, tell you what, I can get someone to send you 5 horses. What, as an agent, what would it, or a commercial, on a commercial deal, what would it look like? And I've asked trainers this. Close friends, I've asked this. What's the margin per horse that you get in the yard? What do you mean? I say, okay, well, I got someone that sent you 5 horses. What would you be prepared to pay someone if that agent had sent you 5 horses, or that individual, friend of friend, refer a friend, whatever it is? A few of the trainers will say, well, Josh, I'd train your horse for free. Okay, so is it worth 24 grand a year to you then? Because you're not getting that 24 grand a year from me. Working out what our margin levels are and then going and saying, what percentage of that margin is it worth to give to a commercial person that we can employ at the end of the day on commission to go out and find the next big owners or any owners to come into our sport? Because currently it's bloodstock agents and trainers. The majority, and they're all going to go to the same sort of areas rather than looking, whose job is it to look at emerging markets? India, Far East. Whose job is it there to go in and say, right, this is British horse racing. It's the sport of kings. It's however you're going to position it in terms of owning horses, in terms of sponsoring races and being part of our sport. It's currently no one's job. So no, that's why we haven't got big people coming into our sport, because it's no one's job to do it.
I've got 2 more questions for you. The first one is about everybody's favorite topic in horse racing, the whip rules. It's all gone a bit quiet on the whip rules, but that damage has already been done. Julie Harrington said that the whole reason for the whip rules after the whip consultation report was published at the Asian Gambling Conference, I believe, is where she was talking initially first about it, was that it was not about welfare, because the pro-cush is not a welfare issue, but it was about improving the optics of the sport and making it as aesthetically pleasing as possible. I'm paraphrasing, but I believe the phrase she used was, Gold Cup will be shown on all the major news channels around the world, and we need to make it as aesthetically pleasing as possible to get to a wider audience. She was also referring to a survey that the BHA had conducted, or at least had carried out, and how 18 to 24-year-olds don't like the whip. So on one hand, the British Horse Racing Authority are telling you that they're not pandering to an audience that they can never get. And on the other hand, they're implementing rules based on the fact that, according to a survey, 18 to 24-year-olds don't like the whip. Isn't that the definition of pandering? But do you happen to know, because this is all very, well, apparently secretive, do you happen to know how many people were surveyed for that report amongst 18 to 24-year-olds?
So it's okay. So there's two. You put forward two elements there of statistics. One of which is ridiculously questionable, which I'll come on to in a second, which is about Gen Z, which is all the work that we've done. The other one was around the whip, around all the whip rules, and that whole project. Well, that was separate, and that thousands of people were asked around that. I'll comment on the one that no one else has really commented on. I had to stand on stage at the Asian Racing Conference in Melbourne in February and respond to that, because I've since found out that the Gen Z is where I have a significant problem. That was a tiny amount of people. I'm talking under 40 in a university dissertation that was never published. We have now stood on the world stage and told the racing world and others that we have a welfare issue, that there is an issue of the perception of our sport between 18 and 24-year-olds. It wasn't even published. I have seen this document. We cannot go around putting out that kind of information on the public stage, in the global public stage, to back up something that we want to see get through. We have got to start being far more professional in what we do in terms of our research. And the reason why we go on the back of data and do that, we've got to stop headlining. I was up on stage 2 days later, and the questions came at me because I was talking about how do we engage a new, younger, far earlier generation coming into our sport, when 2 days before, the head of our sport had turned around and said 40% of them think we've got a welfare issue. It's an absolute load of rubbish. Do I believe that the whip will be around in 10 years' time? No, only for correction and safety reasons. So it's going out. And what will happen is the whole breed of horse will have to change. And this is the big problem. Horses are flight animals. What does the Pro-Cush do? It engages flight mode. We all know it doesn't hurt. You can hit me, you can hit you. We can do whatever we want to try and prove it. But it's called a whip. And a whip, in normal people's language, and smacks and hit are aggressive terminology. So what they've done, they have pandered to governments that was turning around and saying, they weren't saying you need to change the whip rules. We need to do more about our welfare. So again, going back to what I was saying previously in terms of we need to shout far louder about the fantastic welfare initiatives and aftercare and data. We've had one man, this Mike Everington-Smith, ex-Olympian and course builder of badminton and the like, go around every single national hunt track, looking at every single fence and statistically looking at the amount of falls per fence to work out whether we could do something better by using data. Does it slightly need reciting, repositioning, whatever it works out to be? That's the kind of brilliant stuff that government want to hear. Not let's just go and put numbers to it. But equally, you've got to look at it. Let's look at, when you talk about changing rules, Formula One's rules change every year. And I bet behind closed doors, there are people who go, oh my God, we can't use the same tyre in a race, or we need more than 3 engines, or whatever I don't know enough about Formula One, but there are various ones. But after they leave that room, they come out and these are the rules in place, and then they carry them out. So I think currently, I have to say, I think the whip rules are actually, they're all right. They're not lots and lots of jockeys getting banned. Has it changed results of races? I can't tell you that. But has our sport fundamentally looked better or worse? Is it the same kind of results? Are we seeing the same kind of results, or are more outsiders winning, less favourites winning? Who I haven't seen those kind of things, the data to tell me that it hasn't worked in terms of placing it putting it in. What it has stopped is win at all costs, which was probably the number one thing they wanted to do. Because there are some I can see over the last 5 years, I'm not going to bring them up on here because I've been blocked by jockeys for bringing it up before, that I cringe at, including that 4 mile chase with the amateurs at the Cheltenham Festival and various other things that were going, that various other rides that I've seen, high profile rides where I go, that is not a good look. I think having it where we are at the moment, I think is fine. But you're right. The next thing that's going to pop up is we need to change them again. No, I think where we're at, and we should be proud of where we're at and stick at where we are at, excuse the pun.
If I had the power to bestow upon you, Josh Apiafi, King of British Racing, our ruler, you are knighted. You are an Avenger now, Josh. What would be the number one policy you would implement to save our sport? Or, less hyperbolic, to make it better? That's
better. I like the latter, and I'm going to go with the latter. I would restructure our sport. We need to restructure it so it's fit for purpose moving forward. It is currently not fit for purpose. And the reason why I say that is we are not set up. I've talked to you over the last hour or so about different elements that we need to bring into our sport. Commercial factor. We do not have a commercial team. So let's set it up like any commercial business. I've got a commercial business in rewards racing. We have the same setup. So the same setup as they see at Tesco's or British Airways or whatever the big PLC companies. We have a finance department. We've got one. It's the levy board. That's fantastic. We have an operations and legal department. That's the BHA. And a regulatory department, which is the BHA. We have an operations department and a venues department, which are the racecourses. We have a PR department, which I believe is Great British Racing. I think Rod Street and his team do a fantastic job on the limited budget on PR. What we don't have is a marketing department, and we don't have a commercial department. And those are the two things that I would bring in that will look at racing to school to 60 years old. Where do we get churn? Where are we dropping out in terms of different attractiveness to different communities? Where is our person that's going out to see the next big backers that could possibly come into our sport? In terms of marketing, we need a percentage of what comes into our sport needs to go back into marketing. We usually used to work around about 10% of turnover goes back into marketing and promoting the whatever product it is. We do that at Rewards for Racing. We did that at Betfair when we grew from having £1 million to a 30 million quid budget in terms of marketing. That was a percentage of what was coming back in terms of revenue, around about 10%. Now, of that 10%, let's say whatever the budget is, 50% needs to be trackable. And that means if I'm spending £1, I need an ROI of what that pound is spending, on what I'm getting back for that pound. And 50% goes on other stuff like brand, charity, sponsorship, stuff that you can't really track. It is slightly feel good, but you know you need to do it because you've got to improve a brand and all that kind of stuff. It's all part of the mix. But the part of the marketing mix at the moment, we've only got enough money to do PR. And like I say, I think they do very well in terms of what that ROI is on PR, but we need proper marketing campaigns with good cash behind them to go and do it and not be afraid to fail because you're not going to win every single time. And that's the problem is we've got people that are afraid to do anything in case they fail because the likes of the racing media and various individuals in it jump on them and basically it's like bullying to the point where they don't even do anything now. So they freeze and they go like this. We can't do anything for fear of getting absolutely bamboozled back in the media. And so that's so that's my number one thing is I would restructure it for growth and change racing to become a growth sport. Look at where the numbers are coming. Work with the bookmaking industry. Look at, okay, what does it look like over a 5-year trajectory? We can start seeing it. And how do we stop those downward spiraling KPIs? It may be that we cannot afford to have 60 racecourses. It might need a restructure of the levy. And we've got to make some bold decisions around that. But structure it for purpose. Don't just stick stuff on a Sunday night because it might have someone will bet on it because there's no other sport going on. If you are going to do that, Don't race on a Monday. Those are the type of things that the sport would then understand. We're going to do this, but we're going to make sure you're looked after. That you get whoever does this gets Monday off, or whatever it works out to be. You'll get paid double, like you would in anything. You get double time for going on a Sunday night, and you get the Monday off. Those are the type of things that we can go and try and do. What we keep doing is going, oh, more. And we haven't got the horse population to do it. We haven't got the jockeys to do it. And as John Franken once said to me, what's the fun in biscuits if there's always biscuits in the tin? That's it. We've got smaller can be beautiful. And that's what I would then go and do to make our sport fit for purpose and growth, and then grow from there. But at the moment, as you started this conversation, we're like the Titanic. We need to become more speedboat.
Josh Apiafi, it has been an absolute pleasure sharing your company, getting your insight into the world of British racing. You're too humble to say it, but you have been invited into 10 Downing Street to give them your views on the sport. Maybe some organisations in British racing try to co-opt your mind and give you some talking points, and you're like, no, don't want them. To which the people in 10 Downing Street, when they didn't hear any talking points from you, but heard some interesting, engaging, thoughtful ideas, actually thanked you for being yourself and not going down the road of talking points. I greatly appreciate your appearance on the show. I hope our listeners do as well. I know they will. Very best of luck for the rest of the year on Sky Sports Racing. Please God, we'll be talking to you again, hopefully after Cheltenham, before Royal Ascot, certainly, and hopefully I'll be seeing you on a British racecourse sooner rather than later as well. Thank you very much for watching, for listening to this episode of the Final Furlong podcast. If you liked it, a like on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube as well is much appreciated. And of course, you can subscribe to us on whichever podcast app and platform it is that you're listening to us on, so that you never miss an episode going forward. From all of us, look after yourself and each other. God bless.